Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar today. This webinar is brought to you by Strategies 2.0, a statewide collaborative funded by the California Office of Child Abuse Prevention. Today's webinar is Understanding Trauma in Young Children, and the webinar is scheduled from 10 until 11:30. My name is Carrie Collins, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I am a trainer and consultant with Strategies 2.0. My role today is to introduce the topic and the speaker to you, keep track of time, and help the presenter and you participants in any way that I can. In a moment, I will introduce LaShonda to you, but first I want to go over a little bit of this the go-to training. So all of you have a little kind of reddish orange arrow that you see that controls your panel. So you can hide your panel if it's bothering you just by clicking on that little arrow. You've joined us today either by telephone or by your computer microphone and speakers. If you've joined us by telephone, and Shane is probably laughing right now because I have said this so many times. If you are joining us by telephone, it gave you an access code to enter and a PIN number. It's very important that you have entered both of those things. Or if you wanted to be unmuted at some point of this webinar, we would not be able to do that because you would be muted. So that's just for those of you who have joined us by telephone. You've all been already contributing to the chat box today, which makes me really, really happy. LaShonda does have some chat box questions for you throughout the webinar, so we will ask for your participation in those questions. And also, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat box. My colleague, Alma Tovar, who I could not do this without, is going to help us monitor the chat box. She will be my seeing eye person today, and she will read your comments from the chat box. Also, if you wanted to raise your hand, you could raise your hand and we could unmute you if you wanted to ask the question live to LaShonda. Usually, people are kind of shy about doing that, but if you would rather ask the question yourself, please go ahead and do that. Also, in the materials section of your panel, you will see a copy of today's PowerPoint, but following the presentation, you will all receive an email that will have the PowerPoint in the email, as well as a link to this recording today. So just so you know, I do have all of you muted. I know that we're all home right now. Well, a lot of us are home, and it's hard to get rid of all that background noise that we have going on. So don't worry about that. We have all of you muted. Okay. So like I said, this webinar is being recorded, and if you go to the Strategies 2.0 YouTube channel, it will be ready to be viewed and listened to in just a few days. You will also find all of our past webinars. You will find recordings from the learning communities, and we have a 4-part series on vehicles for change. So you will find all of that on our Strategies YouTube channel. An evaluation will be sent to you automatically following the webinar. We ask that you please complete that. It really helps us to get better at what we do. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Facebook. You can go to our strategiesca.org website to see what else we have going on. I know that we do have one more webinar next Tuesday on the social determinants of health. So if you have not registered for that webinar, I do believe we have a few openings. I'm not sure. If you have problems getting in, let me know. So with that, I would like to introduce our presenter to you today. LaShonda is the Best Start Specialist for Children's Bureau. For the last 8 years, LaShonda has worked with adolescents and young children between the ages of 3 and 6. She is very passionate about the foster youth in her community prior to being in the foster care system herself. Before coming to becoming the Best Start Specialist, LaShonda worked in the day treatment intensive program at Children's Bureau for 4 years with children between the ages of 3 and 6 years old who have experienced traumatizing events. The DTI program provides mental health services for children who have displayed severe social, emotional, and behavioral problems due to trauma. Before I turn this over to LaShonda, I just want to take a moment to say that one of the perks of being the moderator of our statewide webinars is that I have the opportunity to meet the most amazing people, LaShonda being one of those. So
You're
even
so
though we
sweet.
worked for the same organization, we never knew each other. And over the last 6 months, we've had an opportunity to get to know each other through setting up this webinar. LaShonda is so passionate about what she does and cares so deeply about children, and especially children who have gone through trauma in their life. So we are in extremely good hands today in this webinar. And with that, I am going to make LaShonda our presenter, and she will take the reins.
All right. Thank you so much, Carrie, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you guys are all here. I'm very excited. Like Carrie said, I've been working with children for the last 8 years. 4 years of that, I was working with adolescents in a group home, and then the other 4.5 years, I've been working at Children's Bureau. 4 years, I was in DTI, Day Treatment Intensive Program, where we worked with children 3 to 6 that had behavioral issues. And then now, the new year coming, I've become the Best Start Specialist, where I work in the community with children 0 to 5 and their families. So we are going to get into my presentation, Understanding Trauma in Young Children. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the learning outcomes. First, we'll explore children's mental health after trauma. First, we're going to define trauma. Then we're going to look at the ACEs study. After that, we are going to analyze different stages of children's lives that have experienced trauma. Next, we will look at triggers, what triggers a child. We're going to look at some common behavior, social and cognitive functioning. And then after that, we are going to look at how to support a young child that has experienced trauma. Mental health includes emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also determines how we handle stress related to others and how we make our choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood to adolescence to adulthood. Today's training is designed to help you understand trauma in a broad and an inclusive way. So we're going to jump into the trauma storm. So this is just like something I thought I would include into my presentation. Obviously, these topics and issues are not easy to talk, hear, or think about. As many of us are drawn to this work who might be attending this webinar this morning, have real connection to the topic childhood trauma. Either our own personal experience or our own professional working career with families, or we have both. We have our own scars around this topic, and I understand that this topic is very triggering and also challenging for others. Trauma is very powerful and important on learning how to heal our wounds and to educate ourselves about resilience and overcoming the past. I just want to put it out there and ask that you guys take care of yourselves every day. And during this webinar, I ask that you take care of yourself as well, especially with your own trauma and scars. Your own trauma and scars and history, self-care is very important, not only for yourself, but for the people around you as well. We can't take care of the families that we work with if we're not taking care of ourselves. So I ask that if you need to take a break during this presentation, please do get some water, get some fresh air, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. And I'm so glad you guys are all here, and take care of yourself first, always. All right, so our first question is, our first thing that we're going to jump into is, what is trauma? According to the National Institution of Mental Health, childhood can be defined as the experience of an event by a child that is emotionally painful or distressful, which often results in lasting effects and physical effects. According to the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administrative, an estimated 2/3 of children have experienced some kind of trauma by the age of 16. Childhood trauma can take many forms, including physical and sexual abuse, or a loss of a loved one, or a life-threatening illness such as cancer. So there are many different ways that children can be affected by trauma at an early age. The term trauma is used to describe an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced as physical or emotional harmful or life-threatening, and has lasting adverse effects on a child's mental health, physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being. We are going to jump into our first polling question. And our first polling question is, what population is at the highest risk to be exposed to trauma? And with this, I'm going to give about 45 seconds to answer the question in the poll.
Okay, so I've launched the polling question. If you're having problems getting in, sometimes if you minimize your screen, that will help you. If you're still getting kind of frustrated, please feel free to go ahead and put your answer in the chat box. So your responses can be the elderly, young children, adolescents, or those with disabilities.
Just let me know, Carrie, when it's time.
I will. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah. We have about 64% that have voted so far.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're going to keep this open for another 10 seconds.
Okay.
So I'm going to close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And then let me share the results with you.
Okay.
So we have nobody that said the elderly. 81% said young children, 8% said adolescents, and 11% said those with disabilities.
Awesome, awesome. Good, good. Okay, cool. I really like that. Thank you guys so much for participating in the polling question. We are gonna, actually the answer is, oh, hold on, sorry guys. The actual answer is young children. Good job everyone that participated in that. From the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, trauma exposure often begins early in life. Young children are at the highest risk for exposure to trauma and the most vulnerable to adverse effects. An estimated half of children in the United States, approximately 35 million children, are exposed to at least one type of trauma prior to their eighth birthday. So that's kind of a pretty alarming number, but you know, it's pretty alarming number because it's such a high number of children being exposed to adverse effects. So we're actually going to get into our next question, which is question number 2. And that is, what are some of the leading causes to childhood trauma? And for this, I'm going to want your responses in the chat box.
And then we're going to go ahead and ask Alma to read those out for us.
Thank you. Oh, good job, Lita. Poverty, okay. Child abuse, yes. Domestic violence, abuse, yes, yes. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, yes.
Okay, good. So you can see that. Yeah, a lot of
yes,
DV.
Yes, really good, guys.
Right.
Really good. Mental abuse, yes.
Right.
Environment, yes. Very good. Low income community, yes.
Yeah.
These people know, they know what they're talking about. Good job.
Exactly.
Oh yeah. Poverty, death, family abuse, or LGBT. Thank you, Shane. That was a good
very
one.
good, Shane. Definitely.
Very good one. Very good one. COVID-19. Yes.
Thank you all for responding.
Oh, race. Yeah. Good job. Okay, so I'll give about 5 more seconds and then I'm going to jump into the next slide. Cases. Thank you, Alicia. Separation from parents. Okay, thank you, Martha. Good job, everybody. I love, earthquakes. Yep, I love them all. Thank you so much for your responses. We're going to get into the next slide. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Some of the leading causes of childhood trauma include accidents, such as like a car accident. I actually have a really good example. So I have a friend, when she was 7 years old, she went her and her family went on a plane ride. I don't know what state or where they were going, but they were going somewhere. And during the plane ride, there was really high turbulence, and it's pretty traumatic. And in the while they were flying, the plane was having really high turbulence, and my friend's mom started screaming on the plane that we're gonna die, we're going down, and all of that. And so my friend was so traumatized from this flight that she had taken with her family that now she will never fly again. She will never go out of the country. And she's looking at, like, I think she's 33 now, and she's never flown since she was the age of 7. So that's just a little example of a trauma. But there's other traumas such as like disasters, emotional abuse, neglect, physical separation. A lot of the stuff that you guys really said is pretty much on this slide. So thank you guys so much. We're going to get into our next one. Oh, another example of a trauma that I saw that's pretty recent was a little boy was at the protest that the protests that have been going on. And in this crowd, the police had pepper sprayed the crowd. And the child was also pepper sprayed. And in the video that I watched, it was really traumatizing. It was traumatizing for me, but I can't imagine being the little boy. So the little boy's eyes just began burning and burning, and he was screaming on video. And I guess one of the protesters actually put milk on his eyes to try to soothe him. But I could see how that could be very traumatizing. Definitely, trying to get out there and protest and then get pepper sprayed, especially for a child. So that was my another example of a traumatizing event. And then we're going to get into the next one. What are the 3 types of trauma that we see with children? So the 3 that I'm going to discuss today are acute trauma, chronic trauma, and complex trauma. And so the first one we're going to get into is actually acute. So acute trauma can be a single event that lasts a limited amount of time. So a prime example would be this little boy right here. If he was, riding his bike, got into an accident, possibly maybe broke his arm or something, that's like a trauma. Definitely a car accident is trauma. You can have nightmares from it, especially being very young. And then I thought about this swimming one. It's kind of a funny story in a sense. It creates trauma. So when I was about 8 years old, I had went to a pool party. And one of my friends that couldn't swim, I didn't know at the time, couldn't swim, she decided to go down a slide. So she went down the slide, and when she landed in the water, she couldn't swim. And so to my ability, I thought like, oh, I'm going to go rescue her. Well, I didn't know how to swim either, and I just felt like I was going to be a hero. So I jumped in the water. I'm saving her as I'm drowning. And luckily enough, I was able to save both of us, but it was very traumatizing. And I didn't go in the water for, I think, maybe about 4 or 5 years. So that's a traumatizing event as well. And then we're going to go into the next slide. So that is acute. Oh, and this is the continuation of acute. And other examples would be like hurricanes or fires or floods. One natural disaster that comes to mind is the New Orleans in August 2009. A great example would be 275,000 families without homes. Could be very traumatizing for a child. One of the quotes I found was survey from an article that I was reading. Surveys done in the first 7 years after Katrina found that the rate of diagnosable mental health problems in children jumped to 9%, a sharper spike than another natural disaster. The effects did not discriminate by age, race, or income. And then another disaster that I thought would go under acute would be like wars and environmental issues, such as acts of terrorism in a school. Also, another violent acute experience, an acute trauma would be school violence, such as threats, fights, bullying. And one last example would be like the Sandy Hook shooting of the children. December 14, 2012, where 20 innocent children were murdered by a gunman and 7 adults were killed. So that's also another acute example of trauma. Chronic trauma is multiple events, often over a long period of time. And so chronic trauma can include like domestic violence, seeing your parents fight a lot. Chronic trauma can include physical and sexual abuse. It could be over over a period of time. Another chronic trauma is like community violence, war. Medical trauma could be like having cancer or something like that. And then racial trauma as being like racial harassment or experiencing discrimination or something like that. And then also we have poverty and chronic trauma. So we are going to jump into complex trauma. Complex trauma is the combination of acute trauma with chronic trauma added to it. So it can be any of the combination in the picture. It could be all of them. It could be 3 of them. It could be any amount. And the term complex trauma describes both exposure to multiple traumatic events from an early age and the intermediate and long-term effects of these experiences over a course of development. This type of trauma is devastating because it occurs during a critical period of brain development and before a child has a chance to develop some strong and positive coping strategies with stress. Young children with complex trauma are likely to exhibit a range of behaviors and academic difficulties that require additional interventions by adults within the community or people that want to help children. So we're going to go into our next slide. And our next slide is question number 3. How is complex trauma different than acute trauma and chronic trauma? If you'd like, you can, we're going to have you answer the questions in the chat box.
And LaShonda, we had a question from one of our participants about, you know, can a 2-year-old be traumatized, and at what age do they remember? I referred her to a story called Mia's Story that was on 2020 or Dateline, one of those, about I think she was maybe a year to 18 months, experienced very, very severe trauma, witnessed very, very severe trauma, and how they learned that, yes, they see, they know, they remember, they don't have the ability to express because they don't have the words, but it is very much in their memories and will come out in a lot of different ways. I highly recommend this story. It's called Mia's Story. I'll see. I'm going to ask my colleague Shane if she could perhaps find the link to that and put that in the chat box for everybody. It has a happy ending. Otherwise, I wouldn't share it with people. Well, not all stories have a happy ending. We know that, but this one does.
Awesome, awesome. And we got some answers in here. We got complex is more than one. Trauma acute is one event. Yep. So I'll give it about 20 more seconds or 30 more seconds, and then we'll get into the next slide. Very good. Very good. Thank you. I love that response. Awesome. All right, about 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to jump back into it. Yeah. All right. Good job, Wendy Brown. I'm like you. Awesome, you guys. Thank you so much for those answers. All right, so we're going to get into our next part of this presentation, and that is let me see, hold on. Let me control. And that is going to be the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And we are going to look at the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, also known as ACEs, conducted by Kaiser Permanente with the help of Dr. Nadine Book-Harris. All right, so the original ACE study was conducted by Kaiser Permanente from 1995 to 1997 with 2 waves of data collections. Over the 17,000 members and participants, the participants received physical exams and completed confidential surveys regarding their childhood experiences and their health status and behaviors as adults. This study was one of the largest investigations of child abuse and neglect and how it affects one's life as an adult. All right, so this is the case study, and we're gonna look, I just put it on here so if you guys want to see some of the questions that they asked in ACEs, which I probably think a lot of you guys have seen it before or even glanced at it. So here I have included the 10 questions. The adverse childhood experiences are categorized in 3 groups, as in abuse, neglect, and household challenges. So these questions are under those 3. These subjects are in these 10 questions. So then we're actually going to look at the demographics of the ACE study. All right, so let's look at the demographics of those with the ACE study. By gender, females experience more ACEs. They're at the 54.0%. Second, okay. And then if we look at ethnicity, you could see that Caucasian, also known as white, is the 74.8% that answered this the survey. And then if you actually look at age, which is pretty alarming, but it definitely makes sense. If you look at the age, 60 and over was the highest population within the case study, within the ACE studies. So that's pretty alarming. So a lot of our older people experience some trauma in their days of growing up. And then we're going to go to the next slide. So now we are going to look at ACEs by gender. And if you notice, emotional abuse for women is 13.1%. So it's the high. Women experience the most emotional abuse. If you look at physical abuse, men experience more of the physical abuse. And then if you look at substance abuse, women use more substance to get by. And so here's some stuff I'm going to read. Preventing ACEs would potentially reduce a large number of health conditions. For example, up to 1.9 million cases of heart disease and 21 million cases of depression could be potentially avoided by preventing ACEs. Some children are at greater risk than others. And the ACEs are very costly. The economic and social cost to families, communities, and society totals hundreds of billions of dollars each year on working with people that have been affected by trauma. We're going to jump into our next question, and then that is going to be a polling question. It's number 4. And the question is, what percentage do you think of children have had 4 or more ACEs? And I'm going to ask that you put it in your chat box. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. It's in the polling question. Sorry. And so we will see the polls once they're done.
And we had another question about, if a traumatized child is treated, can he or she reverse all the negative effects that could arise in the adulthood? Yeah, it could result in different. It could result in, you know what? Let's ask the group maybe. I know that we, in one of our trainings, we talk about neuroplasticity of the brain, and there's a really good video that, your brain is wired in a certain way, and, all of these negative experiences wire your brain in a certain way. Mm-hmm. But if you have, these positive people come into your life and they're exchanging those negative experiences with positive experiences, that you literally can rewire the brain. So there's always hope. But yeah, I would like to know what other people in the group think too. Let's finish up this poll first of all. We had a little over half vote, but I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let me share the results. So we have 48% of you said 36.1%. 29 said 15.9%. 19% of you said 12.5%. And 3% of you said 9.5%.
Awesome,
So
awesome.
the majority said 36.1%.
All right, so let's see what we got. So I'm gonna have to give it up to my group that got the 19% because it's actually 4 or more ACEs that children have experienced, and the percentage is 12.5%. 12.5% is still pretty alarming for how many people that have experienced 4 or more ACEs. I would love to see that number at 0, all of them at 0, but I know that's probably not a thing. So it's actually 12.5% of the total. All right, and then we're going to get into one more slide. This is just another diagram of showing like the California participants. So in California, 61.7% of adults have experienced at least 1 ACE. 1 in 6, which is 16.7%, have experienced 4 or more ACEs. And this is just a different diagram. This is the California participants. So that is just that right there. And then we are going to, and then here I have included the stress and early brain growth. That is actually a part of the material that will be included in this presentation. So you will be able to get this slide after, and I think it's actually included in here. So if you want to download it, you could download it if you need to. And that's just explaining like the understanding adverse childhood experiences. It just gives a better diagram of kind of like how the brain is functioning for a child. All right, so we are jumping into responses to trauma by age. And so this, I've broken it down by children, and we're just going to jump into it and go ahead. Okay, so some of the behaviors that I've seen or noticed with infants and toddlers that have experienced trauma is a fear of being left alone, fears of strangers, clinging to caregiver, difficulty separating from a caregiver. That can kind of be just a kid, but these are some of the common signs among children. And then also like nightmares and poor sleeping can also be an issue for a child that has experienced trauma in this age. And I'm going to jump into a personal story of mine. Working in DTI, I worked with a lot of children. There is a little boy that I worked with, amazing little boy. He had been in so many different foster homes growing up, and he didn't have that sense of belonging. He didn't have a caregiver that supported him. I mean, going from house to house, you don't really know who you are or what your family, like who your family is. And so this little boy, when he came to my program, the second day of his program, he asked me if I was his mom. And I had to let him know, I'm not your mom. I am, my name is Miss LaShonda. I'm here to support you, and I'm here to help you so that you can make good choices when you go to school or whatnot. And so just that, him asking me if I was his mom just showed me that this little boy has been through the ringer. He had been through a lot of trauma. Just going from house to house is traumatizing. You never know what could happen. He didn't know what, his family or whatnot. And so you could tell that with him moving, that he just longed to be loved. And I could tell that he had experienced some trauma of like separating from caregivers. So that was one of my stories. Another example would be our early school age children. So this, some of the signs of those children would be like anxiety or fear, a feeling of guilt, shame, self-blame that it's their fault that they've experienced this trauma. Behaviors in social settings could be like outbursts, aggression, or even possibly withdrawing. And they might have a hard time trusting peers or adults, fixating on the safety of others. So I used to have another little boy that was in my program. He every time he would come to our program, he would always say, I hope my aunt is okay. I hope she's doing okay. And he was always just really worried about the safety of his aunt. And so I realized that, the trauma that he experienced is that he never really had a safe home or a safe caregiver or a caregiver that showed him love and, you know, and how a child's supposed to be. So I could tell that he was really fixated on the safety of his aunt. And then other things that could happen for school age children would be like wetting themselves, regression, or wetting the bed, and then also nightmares as well. I have a prime example of a little boy that I worked with. I worked with a lot of boys. So I had a little boy that had 4 siblings, 5 including himself, and he was taken out of the home with his mother because there was domestic violence within the household. And he was placed in a resource house with a mom and a dad, and he lived there for 12 to 18 months. I can't exactly remember, but something like that. And while living there, he gained a lot of skills. He showed, like, he learned how to use the restroom, he learned how to write his name, and all these wonderful things that children should be learning at their age. And when his mother decided, you know, to get her act together, got her stuff together, she actually did all her parenting classes, and then was able to reunite with her kids. And so when all the kids went back with their biological mother, the regression was ridiculous. The child's behaviors became extreme. We were working on him with using his words, and then the first week when he was at home with his siblings and his mom, he was throwing chairs in the room, he was spitting on staff, he was ripping things off the wall. So you definitely can see the regression for this little boy returning back to back to his mother. So that's one example of a client that has experienced trauma, early school age children. And then we're going to talk about school age children. So some of the school age children, they have behavioral issues. They will show some type of self-esteem issues possibly. They have poor social skills. They might have difficulties with memory or social difficulties. And then they might show depression symptoms for school age children. And they might feel a sense of unsafe within their school. And then I'm going to get into one more story about this. So this picture, it tells 1,000 words. And I think about it, and I think about a friend that I had. She was molested a lot of her life. And when she turned 12, she decided to tell, the police of what was going on. And when she told them, they believed her. They took the abuser, they arrested him, and he was locked in jail. The reason she didn't tell anybody was because she was very scared. She was terrified. She didn't know what to do. She was already in the foster care system, so for her to lose her home was going to be heart-wrenching for her. So she decided to stick it out. But luckily, she is doing great. She has 2 beautiful children, and she was able to receive a lot of treatment for it, a lot of therapy, working on herself. And now she is a prospering citizen, and she also tells her story as well for other girls that would understand. So the next thing that we're going to go into is our common triggers of children. So what possibly could be some common triggers? We're going to jump into my question 5, and it's actually a chat box question. And so with that, it's what types of things can trigger a child? And then I'm going to give about 1 minute to answer. So take your time. Wendy, you're on it. Oh, good one. I like that touch. Okay, smells. Okay. Environment, for sure, environment. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've seen this a lot. Good job. Environment words, loud noises, certain smells, dreams, yelling, shouting. Yeah. No, really, all of this. Music. Oh, music's a good one. I like that one. Okay, so I'm going to give it about 15 more seconds, and then I'm going to jump into the next slide. Oh, parent caregiver. Good job, Sylvia. That was a good one.
Lots of great answers.
Yeah, awesome. I'm like writing them down because I'm like, ooh, movie scenes. Ooh, that's a good one. I like that. Okay. All right. Good job, everybody. Smell, video game. Oh, video games. Good one. Darkness. Awesome. So here are just some of the common ones I found. It might, oh, peaceful area. Invitation to others. All right. So I'm going to jump into the next slide. Thank you, everybody. So some of the triggers can obviously, you guys named so many that I'm so grateful for. Some of the triggers can include smells, physical touch, loud noises such as like emergency vehicles or sirens, threatening gestures, kind of like jumping at somebody. Witnessing violence can trigger a kid. Authority figures can also trigger a child. Chaos or uncertainty. Changes in a routine. I've seen that many of times. Once you change the routine, it gets crazy. And so other things that I have included in here were like colors, places, things. One of the things I really like was anniversaries. And I don't want to say like, but anniversaries do trigger feelings. So I lost somebody a little while ago, about 10 years ago. And every time their anniversary comes up, it feels like the feelings are all coming back that same day. And so for children, this is the same thing. You know, the anniversary date could be really heart-wrenching on a child. I had a friend that lost her mother when she was 6. And every year on that date, it's really hard for her, really hard for her to cope. Okay, and so when we go through triggers, sometimes feelings come up as well, or emotions, and then, and so this is just an example of kind of like what you would feel if you're being triggered by something. You could feel trembling, you could feel numbness, you could feel racing, anxiety, nervous, any of these combination, you can feel them all. So sometimes we have to be mindful of what can be triggering. And so I actually have a really good story. I had a friend become a foster parent during COVID, and she got this little boy, amazing little boy, and he came into the kitchen, and the first thing he saw was a wooden spoon. Terrified, ran to the room, went under the covers, and was like, "Can you hide the spoon, please?" And I said, "Okay." So I used some of my DTI skills, and I sat there and I talked to him. I said, "Why are you scared of the spoon? You know, what happened?" And he actually told me that he used to, if he was in trouble, the wooden spoon would come out. And so it was pretty interesting to see that trigger in this little boy that was only 4. So that was my story of triggers, and then we're going to jump into, oh, this is part of triggers actually. The next scene. Give me 1 second. So when triggered, children either can fight, flight, or freeze. And some of those responses kind of look, so for fight, it would be like aggressive behavior, yelling, posturing, swearing. I've seen a little kid swear, promise. I've been called terrible names. And then also with flight, it would be like running away, restless legs, numbness, anxiety, refusing to talk, or avoidance. And then the freeze part of this would be feeling stuck or numb, or slightly confused with pale skin, or like spacing out would be some of the responses to freeze. I just put this kind of in there. I just thought I'd include this. An experience becomes traumatic when it overwhelms the system for responding to stress. The emotional brain continues to sound the alarm and send messages to fight, freeze, or flee, even after the threat has been passed. So we're going to jump into question number 6, and I'm going to ask that you guys put it in the chat box. What are some things that trauma impacts? And when I mean that, I mean like what other things can trauma impact? And I'm going to give everybody about a minute to answer this in the chat box. Oh, yes, yes. Eating habits, education, relationships, yes. Awesome. Health, trust, yes. Good job. Development, yeah. Health, communication skills, yes. You guys are on it. I think you guys need to run this group. Awesome.
we have a lot of smart people on this webinar.
Awesome. Aw. This makes me so happy. Awesome.
Ashanda,
Awesome.
this
Yes,
is
ma'am.
Alma. Just so you know, the chat can be saved, so you can have a copy of the chat.
Awesome.
So
Awesome. Thank you
don't
so
have
much.
to take notes. Yes.
Oh, okay. Even though I have a pen, I'm not taking notes. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, guys, I'm going to give about 5 more seconds, and then I'm going to jump into my next slide. 1, 2. All right. So some of the impacts can include brain development, cognition, behavioral, emotions, mental health, physical health, relationships, and self-concepts. So yeah, you guys are pretty much on the money. So good job, everybody. And so these reactions don't happen right away. Some of these reactions can happen days, weeks, months, or even years later. And when I say years, I think of a friend that lost somebody when they were young, and all of a sudden, in the last 2-3 months, she's trying to finally work through the loss of the person of a person, and it's pretty crazy that it can come up way later in life. It's, you know, in your adult life. So we're going to jump into the impact of childhood trauma. With trauma, there can be some lasting effects. So here is one. So that would be like the brain development. So trauma can cause the brain to have smaller size, less processing, so maybe not be able to process certain things, a change in gene expression, and also impaired stress response. So a smaller brain, or a brain that's experienced trauma, can have all of these brain development issues coming up. So here is a picture of what a healthy brain looks like, and a trauma abused brain. And so when looking at the pets at the right side of your screen, you see a healthy child's brain, and you notice the red. The red, you can notice the regions of red, which is awesome, which is really good, and the low, which is the blue and black. When you look at the brain with the trauma, you can see that the brain of an orphan child who was institutionalized quickly after birth shows the effects of extreme trauma in infancy. So when looking at this brain, you see that there's a lot of there's a lot more black and blue on the left side. And so the temporal lobes help regulate emotions and receive input from senses. Children suffer emotional and cognitive problems as well. And here's just another example of another brain. So you have your normal brain on the left, I think, and then on the right you have extreme neglect and trauma. So you can definitely see a change in size in the brain. And so some other things that happen that impact trauma are such as cognition, like language delays, possibly like a problem with a conversation, and their focus. Some of their motor skills can be a little off. Their creativity could have issues. They also might have some learning issues, and memory, for sure, definitely memory. All right, we're going to get to the next one. Some things that come up with mental health when you think about a child that has experienced trauma. If they've had trauma for so long, some of these mental health disorders can happen, such as like anxiety disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also known as ADHD, eating disorders, depression, PTSD, and also schizophrenia for a child that has experienced trauma. Okay, 1 second. Okay, we're going to jump into question number 7. What are some emotions that children experience due to trauma? Emotions. So what are some feelings that children feel during trauma? Ooh, anger, shame, yes, sadness. I mean, I'm not saying yes, but yes, this is what children experience. Confusion, for sure, confusion, fear, yeah, anxiety, helplessness. Oh, I hate helplessness. Frustration. Mm-hmm.
I like that comment, confusion. I haven't heard that, come up before, but that's really interesting. Confusion.
No, really. I mean, children they might not understand really like how they're feeling or what the emotion is that they're feeling inside. So it could be really challenging for like, especially for like a little kid. Oh, I like that unknowingness. Ooh, vulnerability. Yes. Yes, as in the answers. All right. All right. Good job, everybody. Thank you guys so much for adding that in there. Anger, the ability to regulate. Yes. Yes. So we are going to look at some of the common signs of trauma, and then we will be closing it up a little bit after that. So common signs of trauma. Common signs of trauma include physical health. Suppression is the act of stopping yourself from thinking or feeling something. If you hold back an emotion like anger, the feeling returns with vengeance. So a child's physical health could be any of these, possibly sleeping problems. They could be up all night, causing chaos in your house. Give me 1 second. Deliberate avoidance. They can also be in panic mode for a child that experienced trauma, or also the fear of reoccurrence can happen for physical trauma or for trauma. One thing that I thought about is post-traumatic stress disorder, especially with kids that experience trauma. That can create anxiety or depression. I'm definitely right about the anger, everyone, and aggression. The child can also be hypervigilant from the trauma that they've experienced. So they might be always like scanning and looking around and just very tense. And so that was one of them. Childhood trauma is likely to lead to post-traumatic disorder. The trauma that, so when a child has experienced different forms of trauma, they're more likely to exhibit PTSD. Children can relive the experience through flashbacks, memories, or nightmares as well. All right, and then another thing would be like relationships. Another example of the impact of trauma is on relationships. So the lack of trust, maybe to lack of trust of an adult or a peer. Difficulties with verbal and nonverbal information for a child. The child might not understand maybe gestures or certain face gestures, or lack of insight into the relationship. Children who experience trauma may have a difficult time forming relationships with peers and other adults, especially when they don't grow up with a supportive caregiver in their lives. According to Dr. Nancy Rapport, a child and adolescent psychologist interviewed on Child Mind Institute website, these kids don't have the context to ask for help. They don't have a model for an adult recognizing their needs and giving them what they need. It also makes it hard for children to accurately describe their feelings. So for some children, for them to be comfortable or build that relationship, it might be really hard for a child to express their feelings or how they're feeling. And then one of the last things we're going to cover in this before we get to resilience, it's just going to be some quick behaviors. I've kind of went over some, so it's kind of almost like repeating that. We're going to look at behaviors.
Shonda, can I stop you for 1 second? There's a question here.
Yes.
And it was sent privately. I'm going to read it. It says, I know a 3-year-old girl that eats a lot, that this could happen because of trauma. And at that age, at 3 years old.
Yeah. It really can. It's It's, yeah, they could just be eating maybe how they're feeling or their emotions, or you know, just trying to numb that feeling, that trauma that they've experienced. So yeah, it can happen very young, very young. Thank you so much for that question. So here's some behaviors of children that have experienced trauma. They might be trying to do attention seeking. Sometimes that could be negative, like throwing something at you or tearing up the house. That's definitely attention seeking behavior, but it also could be because of trauma. Feeling a sense of feeling unloved. You also display children with behaviors and tantrums. And the child might have a lack of confidence. Definitely, I think I included this earlier, a change in routine can cause behaviors as well. And another, you know, changes in routine can cause behaviors, and possibly a child to feel disappointed maybe if they're not doing their regular routine. All right, we're gonna get into the next one. All right, give me 1 second. All right, so we are gonna get into resilience, and okay, we are gonna get into resilience, and we're gonna get into our question number 8. What are some ways to build resilience in young children who have experienced trauma? So what are some positive ways that we can help build up young children who have experienced trauma? I'd like you to answer in the chat box, and then we'll kind of go through it real quick. Yay, I love it. Yes, be consistent, reliable. Yes, building trust. Yes, being consistent, establishing trust. Yes, those are all so good. Be patient and nurturing. Yes, build counseling, trust, relationships. Don't deny their trauma. Yes, establishing a healthy trust. Yes. Is Tracy LaMonica answering? Hopefully. Become a role model. Good job, Lita. I love it. Smile. Acknowledging their feelings. Good job, everyone. Have patience. Oh, patience is a virtue, especially with little guys. Positive energy. Yes. Awesome. All right, I'm going to give it about 20 more seconds, see what else comes in, and then we're going to jump into the last bit of my presentation.
I love love. Somebody said love.
Oh, hugs. Hugs.
Love and hugs and kindness.
I just want to say hugs are everything to a little kid, because that was one thing a lot of the children that came to my program, they weren't receiving hugs. Even by their caregiver or whatnot, you could tell. That's all they wanted was hugs. So yeah, hugs are a big thing. Oh, good job. Okay, everybody, I'm going to jump back in. We're going to finish this out right. I'm almost done. Woohoo!
Thank you all so much.
Good job, everybody. I love the answers. Great time. Quality time. Yes. So resilience, coming through the cracks. Resilience can be defined in several ways. And so we're going to look at different ways of how to support a child that has experienced trauma. Building resilience. So building resilience, okay, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network highlights the following protective factors that promote resilience to childhood trauma. So support. All children need is support. They need to have family, friends, school, even like community workers, such as some of us that are on this presentation. They also need a safe environment, including home, school, community, and also therapy is a safe environment for children. Definitely building resilience would be positive self-talk and self-esteem, building up their self-esteem, letting them know that they are worth it, they're doing great. Coping skills, teaching children how to cope when upset, when frustrated, when maybe they don't understand. And then the last one is also goals, beliefs, and dreams. Just building that resilience in the child and just letting them know that you support, their dreams and also their goals. So that's how we build resilience in a child. How to support a child with trauma. So these are some of the things that I was doing in my group, and I didn't tell the children I love them, but I would tell them that Miss LaShonda cares about them very much and wants them to make really good choices. I also did a lot of praising. I believe in praising, even if they might have done it wrong, you still praise them because they're trying. And kids aren't going to get it right the first time, so you really have to take your time and be very patient. Also encouraging. One of my favorite things is to see a kid that maybe thinks that they're not going to win the race, and then you encourage them, you tell them to keep trying, and then they win it. So it's awesome. Listen to the child as much as you talk. Let the child talk, because they might be trying to get something out to you and they might just not know exactly the words. So if you put it together kind of like a puzzle, you can get the conversation. Also, how to support a child is managing conflict. That would be helping the child. Oh, speak with your hug. Speak your hug. That's cute. Thank you, Lita. Manage conflict. So preventing manage conflict. In DTI, we would separate kids if there was conflict, and we talk to them and we discuss like, hey, how could we have done this different? What could we have done? Let's take a deep breath. Let's go back to our peer that we had the conflict with, and let's do a handshake. Let's say sorry, and let's manage this conflict and make sure that we can keep going. And then also, how to support a child is create that relationship with the child. You can, and also with its peers, so that the child, if friends always help. So always create that relationship with peers, caregivers, you name it, they need it. Another thing that I thought would be helpful is this feeling face chart, because behind every feeling is a behavior. And so if you could name that feeling, you could probably get to the root of why that child is behaving like that. So really trying to understand their emotions and help them understand their emotions. Definitely being a role model with emotions. So if you get mad, are you going to throw a chair? Because your kid might see that, and you're going to be his role model, so he might throw the chair next week. So you want to always make sure that you are being an awesome role model to these children that have experienced trauma. Once again, encouraging praise. I believe in praise every bit with a child. Listen to your child's feelings. Really listen, because sometimes that's all they're trying to tell us. That's it. And then also identify feelings in others. So this way you can actually play like a game. You could say, am I happy? Or like something like that, just so that they understand like facial gestures as well. And we're going to get to the next slide. So I kind of made a duplicate slide, but this one actually has like a little different, how to manage your feelings. And so we just kind of went through that. How to manage your feelings is like label emotions, be a role model, reassure, help manage everyday worries. So by talking to your child about how they're feeling when they wake up, and then at the end of the day, maybe asking them, how did you feel about your day, might be helpful as well, just to manage everyday feelings. And then we are going to jump into some coping strategies that I used in my program, and I think would be very helpful for others. And so, hold on, give me 1 second. Okay, and that would be coping strategies. And some of the coping strategies that I saw that that we used to use in our program would be listening to your favorite song. Maybe you're really frustrated and you have so much emotions going on in you. And so instead of throwing, the box of crayons across the room, let's listen to your favorite song. Let's get those wiggles out, and let's regroup after you're done dancing and getting all that frustration out. Also, talking to a grown-up or talking to a trusted friend helps a child that has experienced trauma cope with their trauma. And then also like painting and art, and that hug is everything. That hug is really everything. Drawing or painting or exercising. I really found a lot of kids liked when they had aggression. I mean, when they were like, when they had a lot of emotions in them. So we would, in my group in DTI, we would put on it's called Cosmic Zen, I think, Cosmic Yoga for children. And we do yoga with the kids if we saw that they were just frustrated. So that's also another coping strategy that you can use. And then let's go to the next. Positive self-talk. This is my number one. This is how you start that relationship, is definitely positive self-talk. You want to build a child's confidence really well. You want them to know that they're safe, that they're strong, and you want to let them know that you're here to help them. I always promoted self-love with them. Definitely, I was just talking about helping the children cope with stress. I worked with that as well, and always encourage motivation, and always encourage them to work through their challenges, because sometimes that's all they need, is that little bit of push, and then they could do what they want. I used to have a kid that when he colored art, he would get frustrated and just throw the crayon. And I'm like, just color. And he'd be like, help me. And I'm like, you know what? You are a kid. You're supposed to enjoy coloring. So I kept encouraging him. It was about a week encouraging him to color. And he finally colored his first picture. It was beautiful. And, you know, it was just that encouragement. He needed that little bit of encouragement. Here are some books Here are some books that in my program that we used. And they talk about like how to cope with some of this stuff. So the first one is Alpha Breaths, and this is a book of the ABCs of how to take breathing techniques and learning how to breathe techniques. We taught a lot of breathing techniques in the program so that they could cope with stress or if they're frustrated. In My Heart is another book. It's one of my favorite books to read to a kid. Each heart in there is a different color, and it has a different feeling and a different emotion with it. And really reading that book to the children, they would say, oh, I feel like that one, or I feel like that. And then they'd explain to us why they feel like that. And so I really love this book. Also today, I Feel Silly is one of my most requested books when I was in DTI. And so this book was really just another book about feelings and how they felt and just how children identified themselves. And my favorite part was always showing a page and saying, how do you identify? Do you feel like this little girl in this picture? And some people would say yeah, some people say no. And then this book at the end is don't feed the worry bug. It's for those children that are showing like examples of like anxiety or showing anxiety. So I thought that was a great book to include in here if you want to use any of these books. So they're right there. And then, so that's how I figure how we could support a child that has been through trauma. And one of the last things that I'm going to cover before this presentation is over is I thought this was beautifully illustrated, and I really like it. So let me get to it. When little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not to join their chaos. And so just reading that, I fell in love with that. And I just realized that, you know, so many children have all these feelings and all these emotions, definitely those children that are in the foster care system. And if all they want is like a supportive caregiver, and that's all they need. Sometimes that's all they need. And they might just need that little bit of hug or that little bit of encouragement that they can do it. And so I just really thought this went really well with this. And yeah, we should apply this with adults. And, you know, as you say that, I just think like there's adults that just don't know how to say, you know what, it's so chaotic, I need a hug. So exactly, children, that's all they need is a hug. And so I just want to recap on what we went over. So we went over, we defined what trauma was. We looked at the adverse studies, also known as ACEs. We analyzed the different stages of children's lives that experience trauma. We looked at triggers. We also looked at common behaviors, social and cognitive functioning. And then we looked how we can build resilience for a child or support a child that has experienced trauma. And I want to thank you guys all so much. Before you jump on, I just want to give a couple shout outs. I want to shout out to Miss Lita Albright. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. As much anxiety that I do have talking in front of people, I want to thank you. I thank you for believing in me. Also, I want to give a shout out to my supervisor that's on. Hey, Tracy, I see you. And I just want to thank everybody for coming. Carrie told me not to tell you anybody this, but this was my first webinar, and I just want to thank you guys so much for attending. And hopefully this will not be my last. And I'm so glad. I'm done, you guys.
You did it.
So
You did it. That is awesome. I think, LaShonda, if I was your supervisor, I would give you the rest of the day off. Somebody's doing clapping emoji. So listen, well, I want to go back to your last slide there, LaShonda. Just go ahead and leave that up. I want to remind you all that you're going to receive this PowerPoint. Yeah, if I was all of your supervisors, I would give all of you the rest of the day off. Are there any other questions or comments? I think Shane's going to put in the link to Mia's story. It's a very, very powerful story of a young girl that went through very traumatic trauma in her life, but because of a kind, loving, supportive foster mother who then became her adopted mother, and therapy, that she was able to survive and thrive through that trauma.
That's awesome.
So thank you, Shane, for doing that. I just want to thank all of you for being on this webinar today. Appreciate you being here. LaShonda, great job. I'm going to stop recording right now, but we will not shut this down quite yet.